Noah Carter watched the storm in his rearview mirror as the first drops peppered his windshield, his truck rattling over cobblestones slick with humidity. The time on his dash read 2:03 a.m. He should have been home. Ellie had finally fallen asleep around 10. He'd kissed her forehead, checked her meds, triple-checked the baby monitor feed, and then sat on the worn couch trying not to think about how the lights flickered again in the hallway. But then the work app dinged. Emergency service requested. Historic district. Circuit failure. Address. Whitmore House. He knew the name. Everyone in Savannah did. It sat like a relic on the edge of Lafayette Square. Marble steps, iron gates, towering oaks dripping with Spanish moss. Old money, old ghosts, the kind of house you passed on a tour and whispered about. Noah didn't do whispers. He did wires and switches and invoices. Still, overtime was overtime. And Ellie's specialist didn't take IOUs. The gates were already open when he arrived, creaking just enough to make him hesitate. Rain pelted his shoulders as he grabbed his tool bag and jogged up the front path. The porch lights flickered like dying fireflies, casting long shadows against columns that hadn't been painted since the Bush administration. He rang the bell. No answer. He rang again, glancing at the job ticket on his phone. Direct request. No middleman. No property manager. The work order had come through the platform's secure line, verified by GPS and ID scan. The name on the client line was just C. Whitmore. The doorknob turned when he tested it. Unlocked. Noah took a breath. "I'm not breaking in," he muttered. "Just doing my job." He stepped inside. The house was still. Grand, but hushed. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, just suspended. Walls lined with portraits, staircases that curved into shadow, air that smelled like lemon oil and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a light buzzed irregularly, like it was gasping for breath. "Hello?" he called out, careful but firm. "Noah Carter." "Here for electrical work. You placed a service request?" Nothing. He walked deeper into the foyer, boots brushing against a rug that probably cost more than his truck. His headlamp cast soft light on crown molding and cracked sconces. The buzz grew louder near the back hallway, where the lights overhead flickered like a reel from an old horror film. Then, just as he reached the circuit box, a light flared behind him. Not overhead, not a fixture, warm. Deliberate, from a room to the left. Noah turned, heart thudding. The door to what looked like a music room was cracked open, golden light slipping through like an invitation. He stepped closer, uncertain. The job was the breaker. Nothing else. Get in, fix, get out. Still, something pulled. He nudged the door open. She was sitting by the piano, barefoot, wearing what looked like an old silk wrap, hair tied back like she hadn't cared how it fell. Her posture was straight, hands resting lightly on the keys, though they didn't move. A single lamp glowed beside her, casting a soft halo over sheet music yellowed with time. She didn't look at him, but she spoke. "Stay." Noah blinked. "Ma'am?" Her voice barely rose above the rain outside. "Until it's over." He stood there, just inside the threshold, unsure what it meant. The storm. "The song? The night? I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't interrupt," she said, finally lifting her gaze. "The lights did." Her eyes weren't sad. They were beyond sad. Empty and sharp at the same time, like someone who had been crying so long she forgot how to stop, like someone who needed to be seen and couldn't stand being looked at. Noah took a careful step forward. "I can check the panel. It won't take long." "Go ahead," she said, but her voice didn't move the air much. "Just don't leave yet." The circuit box was a mess. Whoever installed it must have thought twisting wires together was an art form. He crouched down, silently pulling tools from his bag, hands moving by instinct while his brain tried to catch up with what else was happening. She played a few notes on the piano, broken chords, not quite a melody. Not quite noise, just enough to fill the room. "My name's Noah," he offered. She didn't answer at first, then softly, "Caroline." The name fit the room, the house, the air. He glanced up. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" "A friend?" She smiled, but it didn't reach anything real. "Everyone who would come already left. The rest are waiting to see what I'll do with the empire." He didn't know what to say to that. So he went back to working. "The house hasn't been touched in years," she said behind him. "I used to visit summers, before it got too heavy to stay." "What brought you back?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then, "My father died last week. The funeral was yesterday. Everyone came dressed in grief they borrowed for the afternoon, then slipped off like heels that pinched." Noah kept his hands moving, but his chest tightened. He knew that kind of loneliness, the kind that shows up most when you're surrounded by people. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. He wasn't cruel, just transactional. "He once gave me a balance sheet for my 16th birthday. Said it was more useful than a car." Noah finished tightening the last wire, flipped the main switch. The light flickered once, then steadied. "There," he said, standing. "Should hold. The system's old but still sound." Caroline didn't stand. She didn't thank him. She just looked at him like she wasn't sure if he was real. "You have a daughter," she said, suddenly. He nodded, surprised. "Ellie, she's 8. You work nights?" "Most weeks." "Bills don't wait." "I used to think love looked like full calendars and empty wine glasses. Now I think it might look like someone showing up when they don't have to." She stood, crossing to the doorway, stopped in front of him. Her eyes studied his face, not in attraction, not in defense, just curiosity, like she was trying to read a language she forgot how to speak. "Thank you," she said. "For the lights?" "For staying." She reached over to the console table by the door, picked up a card from a dusty silver tray, wrote something on it, handed it to him. He took it. In neat cursive, it read, "Come back in the daylight, if you believe this place is worth saving." He looked up, but she was already walking away. The rain had stopped, but Noah didn't notice until he stepped outside and felt the stillness, the kind that only comes when something is about to begin. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Morning in Savannah rose like steam from a kettle, slow, warm, and heavy with secrets. The sky stretched soft and low over the city, stitched with streaks of pale gold and mist. Noah Carter stood barefoot in his kitchen, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes locked on the card he hadn't yet put down. "Come back in the daylight, if you believe this place is worth saving." It sat on the counter like it had always belonged there. He'd read it at least 6 times. Each time it said something a little different. A dare. A question. A door. Ellie padded into the kitchen in her mismatched pajamas, rubbing one eye with the back of her hand. "You didn't sleep," she said, matter of fact. He blinked, caught. "I did." "A little." She climbed onto the stool and reached for the last banana. "You were out late. Fixing something?" "Yeah." "Big old house in the historic district. Fancy. Like one of those houses in the books you like." Ellie peeled the banana slowly. "Was anyone there?" He hesitated. "Yeah." She watched him a moment. "Was she sad?" His jaw tightened around his coffee. "Yeah. Did you fix it?" "I fixed the lights," he said softly. "That's not what I meant." He didn't answer. The morning ticked on. Lunches packed, school drop-off, work orders queued up on the app. But all day, through every blown fuse and humming outlet, Caroline Whitmore's voice echoed like static in the back of his mind. Stay until it's over. He didn't know what over meant. But he kept wondering why she didn't want to be alone when it arrived. Caroline hadn't opened the windows in years. The ones in the sunroom stuck when she tried, the wood swollen from age and disuse. She pressed harder, pushing until they groaned open, and the smell of wet jasmine rolled in, thick and green. The piano still sat in the same spot, lid open like it was waiting for someone to remember the tune. She stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. The floor creaked, the same creak as always, familiar. Unwelcome. She had dreamed of that moment, last night's quiet, Noah standing half in shadow, the flicker of his headlamp softening when he saw her. Not afraid. Not retreating, just there, present. He hadn't looked at her like everyone else had since the funeral, not with expectation, not with inheritance in his eyes. She wasn't sure what to do with that. Ruby found her in the sunroom just after noon, carrying a tray with sweet tea and half a biscuit. Always the same rhythm. Noon meant tea, grief or no grief. "You're awake early for someone who spent half the night haunting the music room," Ruby said, setting the tray down with a clink. "I couldn't sleep," Caroline said. "You never could. Not in this house," Caroline sat. Stirred the tea but didn't drink it. "There was a man here last night." Ruby raised a brow but didn't interrupt. "Electrician. Emergency call. I didn't expect him to come. Didn't expect anyone. Honestly." Ruby's silence deepened. "He didn't ask questions," Caroline said. "Didn't fawn. Didn't flirt. Just fix things. Quietly." Ruby sat in the armchair across from her. "And that felt strange?" "No. It felt like a door I didn't know was still unlocked." Ruby took a sip of her tea. "Then maybe it's time you start walking through." Caroline let that sit. Then, "I left him a note." "Of course you did." "I told him to come back in the daylight." "If he thought this place was worth saving." Ruby chuckled, low and warm. "What about you, sugar? Do you think it's worth saving?" Caroline didn't answer, but her eyes drifted to the windows, to the parts of the garden still blooming despite the neglect. Noah didn't go back that day. He meant to. He stared at the job app, reread the request. There were still repairs flagged. The house needed a full inspection. He could justify another visit, easily, but he didn't. Not until Ellie was asleep again, cheeks flushed and curls spread across her pillow like a halo. He brushed a hand over her forehead, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Then he grabbed his jacket. When he pulled up to the Whitmore estate, the gates were closed this time. He got out of the truck and stood for a moment in the dark, not moving. The wind lifted slightly, rustling the oak trees. Somewhere deep in the house, a single light glowed behind a second-story window. He rang the bell. No sound inside. He waited. A minute passed. 2. Then the door opened. Not wide, just enough for her to be seen. Caroline stood there barefoot again, this time in jeans and a loose cardigan. Her hair was down, framing her face in loose waves. She didn't smile. But she didn't close the door either. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "You invited me." She stepped aside. Noah entered slowly, the same lemon and old paper scent folding around him like a hush. The silence was thick again, but not cold, just suspended. She led him back to the sunroom without speaking. The windows were open. The breeze was soft. On the side table sat 2 cups of coffee, one steaming, one already cooling. I didn't know if you'd say yes, she said, handing him the hotter one. I didn't either. They sat. The piano sat quietly between them, lid open. I used to practice here every summer, she said. My mother loved music. My father tolerated it. Noah nodded. My daughter sings badly. Loudly. I think that's the best kind. Caroline smiled, just barely. Noah looked around. You live here now, for now, until the will's settled, the estate. The legacy. You don't sound excited. It's hard to be excited about becoming the face of something that never really saw you. That hit something in him. They sat in silence a little longer. Then she turned to him. What's her name? Your daughter. Ellie. She's lucky. I don't know about that, he said. She's sick. Recovering still. I work nights to stay ahead of the bills. It's not much of a childhood. She has a father who stays. Noah looked at her. And she looked right back. And for a long, still moment, there was no estate, no funeral, no inheritance hanging in the air. Just two people. Just presence. He sipped the coffee. It was terrible. But he didn't say so. He just stayed. The next morning, the Whitmore estate looked different. Not brighter. Savannah's overcast skies kept their gray grip on the day, but less haunted somehow. The windows were still streaked, the ivy still strangled the porch columns, but something had shifted. Inside, the piano lid was still open. Two coffee mugs sat untouched in the sunroom, rings of faint warmth left behind. Caroline hadn't slept. Again. Upstairs in her father's study, a letter still lay sealed on the desk, embossed with the family's crest. It had arrived 2 days after the funeral. She hadn't opened it. Not yet, because she already knew what it said. Marcus Jennings had made it clear in his casual, clipped tone, there are conditions to the inheritance. Your father wanted continuity, a clean image, a future that reflects his values. What he meant was control. And Caroline had never worn control well. She stared at the envelope, heart ticking like a metronome, and then, almost as an escape, went to find Ruby. She found her in the greenhouse, watering plants that hadn't bloomed in seasons. Do you believe in second beginnings? Caroline asked, arms folded against the light chill. Ruby didn't turn. Child, I believe in people who choose to begin again. Doesn't matter if it's the second or the seventh. Caroline stepped inside, letting the humidity wrap around her. He came back. The electrician. Ruby nodded once, unsurprised. We talked, not about anything big, but it felt like breathing different air. That man sees quiet as something sacred. Most folks try to fill it. He lets it hold. Caroline let her gaze drift to a potted lavender bush, half alive, half forgotten. I don't even know why I asked him to stay. Yes, you do, Ruby said gently. You just don't know how to admit it yet. Noah's third visit to the estate wasn't planned. He had a job in the neighborhood, a fuse box on Gaston Street. But after he wrapped up, he found himself idling at the intersection 2 blocks from the Whitmore gate. His truck turned left without permission. This time, the gates were open again. When he knocked, the door creaked without being answered. Hello? He called out, stepping just inside. In here, came Caroline's voice, faint but clear. He followed the sound to the back parlor, another forgotten corner of the house where morning light struggled through stained glass windows. She was kneeling on the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes and dust-covered ledgers. Sorry, she said without looking up. I didn't expect you today. I can come back, he offered. She shook her head. No. Stay, please. He stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning the room. The walls were lined with portraits of men in stiff collars, their gazes disapproving even in oil paint. I'm trying to decide what matters, she said. What's worth keeping? What's just... Wait. He crouched beside her, picked up a cracked leather folder. Inside, stock certificates and board meeting minutes. These worth anything? They're worth too much, she said quietly, and somehow not enough. She looked at him then. Really looked. I'm supposed to take his place, sit on the board. Keep the company image clean. And to do that, she whispered, I have to marry by my next birthday. Noah's brows lifted. You're kidding. I wish I was. He sat back on his heels. That legal? It's written into the trust. Not illegal, just binding. He always thought love was a contract. So I guess he figured I'd sign mine eventually. Noah was quiet. The clock in the hallway ticked louder than necessary. What would you do? She asked. He glanced at her. Depends. Do you want what comes with it? Caroline stared at the papers in front of her. I don't know anymore. There's a version of me that might have, the one that wore navy blazers and spoke at charity luncheons. But she died somewhere between Harvard and this funeral. He let that hang for a moment. Then he said, I used to think fixing things meant getting them back to how they were. But sometimes fixing means building something new. Something that works now. She closed the folder gently. I don't even know what that looks like. Maybe you don't need to. Not yet. Their eyes met again. There was something fragile in the space between them. Not romantic, not yet, but tethered. Like two people standing at opposite edges of a bridge still being built. Then a knock echoed from the front door. Sharp. Precise. Caroline stiffened. Expecting someone? No. She stood quickly, brushing dust from her jeans. Noah followed her into the hall, stopping just short of the foyer. The door opened. Marcus Jennings stepped inside like he still owned the place. He was polished, silver-haired, wearing a tan linen blazer and an expression that managed to be both warm and warning. Caroline, he said with a nod, didn't realize we had company. Her jaw set. This is Noah. He's been helping with the electrical. Marcus extended a hand toward Noah, who took it slowly. Appreciate you keeping the lights on, Marcus said, voice coated in southern civility. I just fix what's broken, Noah replied, letting go. Caroline's arms crossed over her chest. Why are you here, Marcus? I wanted to check on you. And to make sure you're reading your father's final letter. There's quite a bit resting on your next steps. I haven't opened it. I figured. Marcus stepped further in, his presence filling the room like perfume you didn't ask to wear. Caroline, the board is watching. The legacy, your family's name, it depends on how you proceed. We all want to support you, but there are expectations. Noah shifted slightly. Caroline didn't blink. You mean pressure, dressed up like support? Marcus sighed, as if disappointed. You're better than this. Your mother knew how to play the part. You could learn from that. Noah saw it then. The way Caroline's shoulders dropped just a hair, how her lips tightened into something polite and tired. She turned to him. Noah, thank you for coming. I'll call you if we need more work done. He hesitated. She didn't meet his eyes. He nodded, grabbed his bag, and walked out the door. Outside, the air was thick again, heavy with heat. He paused on the porch, hand on the railing, his chest knotted tighter than it had been in weeks. Back inside, Caroline stared at Marcus like he was a mirror she'd once mistaken for a window. You think you know who I am, she said softly. But all you see is who he wanted me to be. Marcus smiled, unfazed. It's not about who you are. It's about who you represent. Caroline walked past him without another word. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water. But it tasted like dust. She turned toward the back door, and for a second, just a second, she wished Noah hadn't left. But she'd sent him away. Because part of her still believed she had to choose, be the woman the world expected, or be the one who opened a door and asked someone to stay. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The rain had started again, slow and steady, tapping on the windshield like a song only Savannah knew how to play. Noah sat in his truck outside Ellie's school, fingers tapping the steering wheel, but his mind was nowhere near the parking lot. It was still back in that parlor, still watching Caroline's face shudder when Marcus Jennings walked through the door. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. But her silence after that moment clung to him. She'd looked different after Marcus showed up, like someone wearing a mask that fit too tightly. The passenger door opened. Ellie climbed in, backpack swinging off her shoulder, a half-finished drawing flapping in her hand. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked, before even buckling her seatbelt. He looked over. "At 3 in the afternoon?" she grinned. "Is that a no?" He sighed, but the corners of his mouth turned up. "1 scoop?" "No bribing me for 2. Deal." They drove toward the little corner shop off Broughton Street, rain misting the windows. Ellie unzipped her backpack, pulled out the drawing. It was a big house, scrawled in bright crayon, with 2 stick figures standing under a crooked tree. One had short brown hair, the other had long red scribbles for hair. A dog floated between them, despite the fact they didn't own one. Noah smiled. "What's this?" "Your new house?" she said, like it was obvious. "My what?" She turned the page toward him, tapping her finger. "This is you, that's her." "Her?" "You know, the sad lady." He blinked. "Caroline?" "Yeah." "Her house is too big for just one person." He didn't respond. She looked up at him, more serious now. "Sometimes I think people don't really know they're sad until someone new shows up. Like how the corners of a room are only dusty when the sun hits right." He gripped the wheel tighter. "Did you see her today?" Ellie asked. "No," he said. "Not today." She nodded. "Maybe she's waiting." They got their ice cream. Ellie picked pistachio because it was green and weird. Noah went for vanilla because it was simple and certain, but the card still sat in the pocket of his work jacket, folded, unread again, and he realized as he watched Ellie laugh that his mind had wandered back to Caroline's porch every single night. Caroline stood in front of her mother's mirror, the one in the corner of the master bedroom, framed in pearl and old wood. It had belonged to 3 generations of Whitmore women, but it had never made any of them feel seen. She wore a pale blue dress now, one her mother had loved. It felt like armor, like she was stepping into a version of herself that could sit through what came next. The envelope still waited on the writing desk. She opened it. Her father's handwriting was sharp and spare. "Caroline, if you're reading this, then you've returned. Good. I always knew the house would call you back. You were never meant for soft things. You were born to lead, to build, to preserve what we created. But people only follow those who can prove they make wise decisions. The board requires stability. The estate requires legacy. You have until your 34th birthday to fulfill the condition set in the trust. Marriage, Caroline. A partner, a symbol of your seriousness. Do not disappoint." Her fingers trembled, not with surprise, but with a fury so quiet it barely moved the air. She folded the letter slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it on the tray beside the untouched tea. A knock interrupted her thoughts. This time, not sharp. Not formal, gentler. She opened the door and found Noah standing on the porch, raindrops clinging to his collar, jacket wrinkled from wear. He lifted a hand. Didn't mean to show up uninvited. Caroline stepped back without a word, letting the door swing open. I came by earlier, he continued as he entered. But then I left. I wasn't sure if you wanted company. She closed the door quietly behind him. I didn't, but I needed it. They walked to the sunroom, now a little less haunted, thanks to the open windows and the lingering scent of jasmine. She poured 2 fresh cups of coffee. This time, she added sugar to his without asking. He noticed, smiled faintly. They sat again in the quiet. Noah leaned forward. Who is he? The man from yesterday. Marcus Jennings. My father's former partner. He's been circling like a hawk since the funeral. Pressuring you? Yes. He waited. Didn't push. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan, pulled out the folded letter, and handed it to him. He read it in silence. When he finished, he set it on the table between them. That's not love, he said. I know. So why are you letting it decide your life? Her voice cracked, just barely. Because I don't know what else I am without all of it. The house, the name, the weight. You're someone who plays piano when no one's watching. Who drinks bad coffee but still shares it. Who remembers the names of flowers, and who waits by open doors even when she's afraid. She looked at him, blinking fast. He added softer now. You're not built for performance, Caroline. You're built for presence. She stood abruptly, pacing a few steps. I don't want to marry for business, she said. But the board has control. And if I lose this house, it's the last thing my mother touched. Noah stood too, slowly. Then don't let them define the terms. Keep the house. Just don't trade yourself for it. A beat of silence stretched. She turned to him, voice barely more than a whisper. And what if I don't know how to be anything else? You learn, he said. And maybe you don't learn alone. Caroline's breath caught. She wasn't sure if he meant it the way her heart hoped he did, but then he stepped back. I should go, he said gently. Ellie's got a school project, needs me to help build a model of the solar system. She smiled faintly. That sounds important. Gravity always is. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. I don't care about your legacy, he said without turning around, but I care if you start thinking that's all you're worth. Then he was gone. And the room felt impossibly full. The morning after Noah left, Caroline stood barefoot on the front porch, a mug of hot tea cooling in her hands. The air hung thick with George's late spring heaviness, scented with magnolia and unsettled thoughts. Across the wide lawn, dew clung to the grass like it didn't want to let go. She had slept barely. Dreams kept pulling her back to things unsaid, Noah's voice in that quiet room. You're built for presence. She didn't know why it stuck so hard. Or maybe she did. Inside, the house creaked with old memory. Each corner still whispered with her father's choices, things taken, things imposed. But now there were new echoes too. Footsteps that didn't weigh heavy with judgment. Someone's jacket slung casually over a chair. A second coffee cup. The sound of Ruby humming down the hall pulled her out of her thoughts. In early this morning? Ruby asked, appearing in the doorway with a pair of gardening gloves tucked under one arm. I never left, Caroline murmured. At least, not really. Ruby studied her a moment, then moved to take the tea from her hands. Come walk with me. Garden's awake. They wandered the gravel path behind the estate. Roses bloomed against their will. Ivy climbed where it wasn't invited. You saw him again? Ruby asked casually. Caroline nodded. He came back. I didn't ask him to, but he came anyway. That man doesn't seem the type to show up unless he means to. Caroline brushed her hand along a row of lavender. He makes it hard to pretend I don't care. Good, Ruby said. You've pretended long enough. It's made you brittle. Caroline stopped walking. I read the letter. Ruby didn't respond right away. Just turned and looked her full in the face. And it's exactly what I thought. Pressure dressed in formality. My father's last attempt to script my life. And what script are you writing, Caroline? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I know it doesn't include letting men like Marcus Jennings decide if I'm worthy of what my mother left behind. Ruby nodded slowly. Then you better start acting like it. Don't just survive in that house. Fill it with your decisions. Caroline took that in. Then, with quiet resolve, turned back toward the house. Yeah, Chateau's across town. Noah stood in the middle of Ellie's bedroom, surrounded by construction paper planets and tangled string. You said Saturn has how many rings? Ellie grinned, her hands covered in glue. At least 7, but I'm adding extra because mine is cooler. Artistic license, he nodded. Approved. She held up the makeshift planet proudly. Do you think she'd like it? Who? Caroline. Noah stilled. Why would you ask that? Ellie shrugged. Because she seems like the kind of person who never got to make her own solar system. He looked at her surprised. You're 8. Where do you get this stuff? She smiled, suddenly shy. From listening. Noah turned the conversation away, but it stayed with him. That night in the sunroom, Caroline had looked like someone carrying a weight she'd worn so long she forgot what it felt like to walk without it. He didn't know what he was to her now. But he knew what he wasn't. A solution. A savior. She didn't need one. What she needed was someone who didn't flinch when the truth got quiet. The following evening, Caroline stood in the music room, holding the old rotary phone in her hand. She dialed slowly, each number clicking like a match being struck. Marcus Jennings. It's Caroline. Well, he said, his voice polished and familiar. I wondered how long it would take. I'm not calling to confirm anything. A pause. Then what's this? I read the letter, and I've decided I'm staying in the house. On my terms. He chuckled softly. And how do you propose to make that work, sweetheart? I'm removing myself from the board. Silence. Then, that's not advisable. Not for you, she said, voice tightening. But it is for me. You're walking away from power. I'm walking toward peace. Try not to confuse the two again. She hung up. Her hand trembled for a moment before she placed the receiver back down. She didn't feel lighter, not yet, but she wasn't sinking either. Check. 2 days later, Noah found a small envelope stuck behind his screen door. His name, inked in Caroline's handwriting. Inside, a note. Come back in the daylight. There's a light upstairs that's been flickering since the night you left. Caroline. Noah stood on the porch for a long time, note in hand. Then he picked up his tool bag. When she opened the door, Caroline didn't say a word. She simply stepped aside. Noah walked in, eyes meeting hers for a beat too long. You got a light out? Second floor, hallway. He started up the stairs. Caroline followed. Halfway up, she stopped. Noah, he turned, hand resting on the railing. She stepped closer. When you said I'm built for presence, you didn't know how much I needed to hear that. I meant it. I'm trying to be that, she said. But it's hard when you've spent most of your life being someone else's idea of who you should be. He took a slow step down toward her. Then don't do it alone. The hallway light above them buzzed softly. Caroline smiled, eyes glinting like something was finally letting go. You came back in the daylight. Noah reached into his bag. I told you I fix what's broken. This time, she didn't stop him. She let him stay. The hallway was quiet save for the faint buzz of the faulty light fixture above. Noah stood on the step stool he'd brought from the truck, one hand steadying the glass cover while the other adjusted the wiring. Caroline leaned against the doorframe nearby, arms folded loosely, watching him not just work, but exist. There was something unhurried about him. Unpolished, yes, but grounded. The kind of man who noticed when something flickered and didn't flinch from it. Most people would have just replaced the whole thing, she said after a beat. Noah glanced down at her. Most people don't know what's still good inside. This wiring's old, but it's solid. Just needs time and attention. She smiled softly. That sounds like a metaphor. Maybe it is. He snapped the cover back into place, tested the switch. The bulb glowed strong and steady. For the first time in weeks, it didn't flicker. There, he said, stepping down. You've got light again. Caroline met his eyes. Thank you. He nodded, but didn't move to leave. Instead, he said, You ever wonder what this place sounded like when it was full? Her gaze drifted down the hallway, where dust still clung to baseboards and picture frames hung just slightly off-center. It was never full the way people think. It echoed more than it spoke. Noah looked at her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was warm, mutual, like a page being turned without needing to read the last line. Then voices downstairs, not sharp, but present. Ruby's and another unfamiliar male tone. Caroline's expression changed. She turned, motioning for Noah to follow, and they descended the stairs together. In the front parlor stood a man in his early 30s, trim suit, neatly combed hair, all confidence and expectation. He was holding a folder in one hand and a polite, too bright smile in the other. Caroline, he said, stepping forward. I'm sorry to drop in without warning. She blinked. Elliot? Your father's attorney asked me to deliver this personally, part of the revised estate packet. Thought it best you get it straight from me. She took the folder, but didn't open it. What changed? She asked. Elliot hesitated. Marcus Jennings filed an amendment. He's arguing that your withdrawal from the board may violate a stability clause. He's asking for a review. Noah watched Caroline's posture shift, shoulders tightening, jaw setting just so. I've already made my decision, she said. I'm not rescinding it. I understand, Elliot said, tone softening. But you need to be ready. He's going to challenge your right to the house. He's arguing that without fulfilling the trust conditions, the property should pass to the foundation. A pause. Noah stepped forward slightly, not looming, just present. Elliot noticed. You're someone who fixes what's broken, Noah said calmly. And someone who's not leaving. Elliot raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Caroline held Noah's gaze for a breath before turning back to Elliot. Let Marcus try. I'm not a pawn. And I'm done living like one. Elliot's features softened. You sound like your mother. The room quieted. He gave a small nod, then added, There's a deadline. End of the month. If you intend to contest, you'll need to file paperwork. I'll send it to you directly. Thank you, she said, her voice even. He nodded once more, then turned and left, the door echoing softly behind him. The silence returned. This time, it hummed. Ruby stepped out from the side hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Man's heart's in the right place, she said, but that other one, Marcus, has always been a storm in a suit. Caroline exhaled slowly. He wants the house, not because he needs it, but because he wants to win. Ruby raised an eyebrow. Then don't let him. Noah spoke gently. What's the risk if he succeeds? Caroline looked around. The room, the walls, the piano in the corner. I lose everything my mother left behind. The only place that's still hers. Noah stepped closer. Then let's not let him win. She looked at him wary. You say that like it's simple. I know it's not. But you're not alone. Her voice caught. I don't know what I'm doing, Noah. You don't have to. You just have to start. A pause. Something shifted behind her eyes. Would you stay? She asked, barely above a whisper. I'm here, aren't I? She reached for the folder. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she opened it. Pages, clauses, legal terms dressed like threats. She skimmed quickly, then stopped. Marcus submitted a proposed candidate, she said, voice tight. For what? Noah asked. For marriage. Noah blinked. You're kidding. She turned the page. He's trying to force the board to accept a man named Grant Belmore. Fifth-generation investor, heir to the Belmore Trust. They had dinner with my father 2 years ago. Sounds like a merger, Noah said flatly. It is. Are they allowed to do that? Caroline shook her head slowly. Only if I don't object. If I stay silent, the board can approve a proxy spouse by default. Ruby let out a long breath. That man's pulling strings like he owns the theater. Caroline looked at Noah. You really think I can fight this? He didn't look away. I think you've already started. She folded the paper again, held it tight. I don't want to marry for an estate, but I don't want to lose it either. Then let's find another way. He said it like it was obvious, like the answer already existed, just waiting to be chosen. And for the first time in a very long time, Caroline believed him. Savannah's late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting pale gold shadows across the sitting room. Caroline sat at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys, but not pressing down. The melody in her head didn't want to come out, not yet. Her thoughts were tangled, strung between her father's impossible conditions and the man upstairs fixing a loose hinge like it mattered more than money ever could. She played one note, soft, then another. The sound wavered. Noah's voice drifted in from the hallway. That's not a sad song. She didn't turn. It's not finished. He stepped inside, wiping dust from his palms. Neither are you. Caroline let her hands fall into her lap. Grant Belmore. Ivy League, third-generation wealth, owns 3 vineyards and a tech startup. You memorizing his resume? Noah asked. Marcus sent me the packet. Financials, headshots. Even a proposed wedding timeline. Noah blinked. You're kidding. She stood, frustration creeping into her posture. He's treating this like a business pitch. As if marrying a man I haven't seen in 2 years is just another box to check. Do you even remember him? Vaguely. I think he complimented the silverware at a charity dinner. Asked me if I'd ever been skiing in France. Noah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her pace the length of the room like she was trying to outrun her own reflection. You're not going to do it, he said calmly. She stopped. Aren't I? No. Because the woman who stared down Marcus Jennings and said, I'm not a pawn, doesn't fold over a name on letterhead. Caroline looked at him, jaw tight. This house isn't just bricks and wood, Noah. It's my mother's music. Her books. The garden she planted from seeds she carried from Charleston. If I lose it, I lose the last real piece of her. Then we protect it, he said. But not by giving away yourself. She sat down slowly on the edge of the piano bench, the resolve in her voice beginning to fray. I'm scared, she admitted. I've never said that out loud before. Noah moved closer, his voice low. You don't have to be brave all the time. Silence settled, not empty, just honest. Caroline looked down at her hands. What would you do if someone said you had to choose between the thing you love and the life you've built? I'd ask myself what kind of life it really is if it doesn't hold room for love. The words didn't float. They landed, hard. Right where they needed to. Then a small knock echoed from the front door. Caroline glanced at Noah, brow furrowed. Are you expecting anyone? He shook his head. She stood, moved to the entryway. Noah followed. When she opened the door, Ellie stood there with a folded paper sun under one arm and a grin that was 2 teeth short of perfect. "Hi," she chirped. "Ruby said it was okay." Behind her, Ruby appeared on the path with a grocery bag in hand. "I didn't know if you'd had a visitor today. Figured the house could use some sunshine." Caroline smiled, stepping aside. "Always." Ellie walked in like she'd lived there in a past life, her bare feet making soft sounds on the tile. "I brought this," she said, unfolding the sun. "It's for the hallway, because sometimes people forget the light's supposed to come from more than a fixture." Caroline knelt. "You made this?" "Yep. Daddy said your house had too many quiet spots." Caroline blinked fast, fighting a lump in her throat. "Thank you." She hung it near the stairwell, and the paper caught the breeze from the open window, fluttering like something alive. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Caroline asked without thinking. Noah raised an eyebrow. Ellie beamed. "Can we?" "Only if you help me cook," Caroline said. The kitchen lit up with new energy. Laughter. Ellie spilling flour, Noah chopping vegetables, Caroline barefoot, hair tied back, apron on, looking more like herself than she had in months. They sat down at the table just before sunset. Real food, real light, real company. Halfway through the meal, Ellie looked up and said, "Is this what dinner's supposed to feel like?" Caroline froze. Noah answered first. "It's what it can feel like." Later, after the dishes were done and Ellie had fallen asleep on the couch with a book draped across her chest, Caroline and Noah stood in the hallway, watching the paper sun swing gently with the evening air. "She feels at home here," Caroline said softly. "She trusts spaces that feel safe." "And you?" "I trust people who choose presence over performance." Caroline turned toward him. "That night you fixed the lights. Why did you stay?" He thought for a long moment. "Because for the first time in a long time, someone looked at me like staying mattered." Caroline's breath hitched. It did. Outside, the crickets began their low, steady chorus. Inside, the silence wrapped around them like a promise. Neither of them said it, but both of them knew. Something was building, and this time, it wasn't made of conditions. It was made of choice. The next morning, the sunlight broke through Savannah's low clouds like it meant something. It touched the Whitmore house with soft fingers, spilling through the kitchen windows, pooling on the old oak floors, catching on the golden trim of the chandelier. Caroline hadn't had the heart to dust in months. She stood at the sink in an oversized sweater, hair pulled back, a cup of tea going cold in her hands. The stillness of the house wasn't empty today. It was expectant, like breath held before a word. Noah's coat still hung on the back of the dining chair. Upstairs, Ellie was still asleep in the guest room. Ruby had offered to take her home last night, but Caroline had gently shaken her head. "Let her stay," she'd said. "Just this once." And now, as she sipped her tea and stared out at the garden her mother once loved, Caroline felt it creeping in, something soft, unfamiliar. A sense of belonging. The door creaked open. Noah stepped in, still smelling faintly of sawdust and rain. "I came early. Figured I'd fix the latch on the back gate before the heat kicks in." "You don't stop, do you?" she said, not unkindly. He smiled. "Only when someone gives me a reason." She raised her eyebrows. "And have I?" "You're working on it." Their eyes held a second longer than necessary. Caroline looked away first, but not before a faint pink touched her cheeks. They stood in the kitchen together, the quiet between them not awkward but full, rich with everything that hadn't been said yet. "I've been thinking," she said finally, "about the estate. About Grant, Marcus, all of it. And I'm done being threatened by paperwork." She leaned on the counter. "I spoke to Elliot. He's helping me draft a counterpetition. If I can prove that the condition is outdated and goes against current legal precedents, we may be able to contest the trust entirely." Noah nodded. "Sounds like a plan. But," she added, "it's risky and public. Marcus won't let it go quietly." "I don't think he knows how to do anything quietly." Caroline laughed, the sound surprising even her. "No, I suppose he doesn't." A thump from upstairs interrupted them. Then small, sleepy footsteps on the staircase. Ellie appeared, hair wild, carrying the paper sun in one hand and blinking against the light. "Do you all have pancakes?" Caroline knelt. "We have ingredients. Can you help me?" Ellie nodded eagerly. "Can we make them in shapes?" Noah leaned in. "She only eats moons and stars, and sometimes a dinosaur if you can manage it." Caroline grinned. Challenge accepted. The morning unfolded gently, flour on noses, syrup on fingers, and laughter echoing through a house that had been too quiet for too long. The past didn't disappear, but it stepped aside for something new. After breakfast, Noah took Ellie out to the garden to help Ruby plant hydrangeas. Caroline watched from the porch, sipping fresh tea, her heart rising and falling like it was learning a new rhythm. Then her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. She stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Finally, she answered. "Caroline," he said, voice smooth as always. "I hear you're making noise." "I'm speaking up," she corrected. "Same thing in Savannah." She leaned back in her chair. "What do you want, Marcus?" "To give you one more chance. Walk away from this challenge. Accept the arrangement. Let the house remain under your name." Quietly, with dignity. "You're not offering dignity. You're offering a leash." A pause. "You're making this personal," he said. "It is personal. If you contest the trust, everything goes public. Your father's legacy. The board, your family name. Are you really ready to air all of that out in court?" "I'm ready to stop pretending it doesn't matter," she said quietly. "That's what I'm ready for. You're throwing away stability for, what? A man with a toolbox and a smile?" She inhaled slowly. "I'm choosing myself." He chuckled, bitter and sharp. "Then you'd better hope he doesn't leave when things get hard." She hung up. Her hands were shaking, but her spine was straighter than it had been in years. She stood and walked out to the garden. Noah looked up from where he knelt, hands in the soil. "Everything all right?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt beside him, pressed her palm into the dirt beside his. "Marcus thinks you're temporary," she said. "I've been called worse. He doesn't know that you show up, that you listen, that you don't ask for anything in return." He looked at her, serious now. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, "but I'll be here. If you let me." She nodded, throat tight. "I want to let you." Ellie came bounding over just then, holding a flower she'd accidentally pulled up. "Oops," she said. "I think I loved it too hard." Caroline laughed, tears suddenly pricking her eyes. Noah stood and took the flower gently from Ellie's hands. "Sometimes. That's the best kind of love." Caroline didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The truth was already blooming. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope with a crisp edge and Marcus Jennings' signature stamped in ink on the back flap. Caroline found it on the silver tray near the front door, dropped there like it was nothing, like it didn't weigh more than the whole house. She held it in her hands for a long moment before walking it to the piano bench and sitting down. Noah was out back with Ellie and Ruby again, helping them build a bird feeder from scraps of wood and a few borrowed nails. The sound of laughter drifted through the open windows, soft and sweet and undeservedly calm. She opened the envelope. Inside was a formal summons, notice of Marcus Jennings's intent to push the board to enforce the original terms of the trust. He'd marked a court date and a meeting with the estate lawyers. Attached was a new photo of Grant Belmore, smiling like a man who had already won. She stared at the papers, her throat tightening. She had wanted to believe this could be handled quietly, that maybe just standing up would be enough. But Marcus never played quiet. He played strategic. Her hands curled around the edge of the document. "Caroline?" Noah's voice low behind her. She turned. He saw the papers immediately. The shift in her shoulders, the rigid line of her back. He crossed the room in 3 steps. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. Watched him read it, jaw tightening ever so slightly. "So this is his move." She nodded. "He's forcing my hand, public hearing, full board presence. If I don't defend myself, they can vote on my removal." Noah lowered the paper. "He's betting you won't go through with it. Because he thinks I won't risk my name." "Will you?" Caroline's voice cracked when she answered. "I don't know." She stood, walked to the window, stared out at the back garden. "When I was a little girl," she said slowly, "my mother used to say this house was made of whispers, that the walls held our secrets so we wouldn't have to." Noah didn't speak. She was wrong. The walls don't protect you. They keep you still. They hold you in place so long you forget you're allowed to move. She turned, her eyes glossy. "Noah, what if I lose? Then you'll lose doing the right thing. That still counts. But what if I lose everything? The house. My name. The last part of her." "You won't lose her," he said gently. "Because she's not in the walls. She's in you." Caroline closed her eyes. That hit deeper than she expected. He always did that. Said things that peeled her back in layers. "I don't want to do this alone," she whispered. "You're not," he said. "Not anymore." The quiet that followed was warm, heavy with meaning. But just as she stepped closer, Ruby's voice floated in from the kitchen. "You've got a visitor." Caroline blinked. "Who?" Ruby stepped in with raised eyebrows. "A young man in a suit. Claims to be a friend of the family. Says he's here to offer a solution." Noah's mouth tightened. "Grant?" Caroline sighed. "Of course." She crossed the foyer, smoothed her sweater, and opened the door. Grant Belmore stood tall and glossy, his navy jacket tailored within an inch of its life, hair swept back like it had never seen wind. "Caroline," he said, offering a smile just a beat too practiced. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Let's keep it brief." Noah appeared silently in the hallway, standing far enough to seem neutral, close enough to feel protective. Grant took in the surroundings. "Place still looks the same. A bit more lived in, maybe." "What do you want, Grant?" He shrugged. "Just thought we could talk, face to face, about what this could be." "About what's at stake?" She folded her arms. "Marcus sent you?" He advised it. "But I'm here because I think we could make this easier, for both of us." She raised an eyebrow. "How?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We don't have to make it real, just legal. A marriage of convenience. We both walk away with what we need. You get the estate. I get the optics, and after a respectful amount of time, we separate quietly, clean. Simple. Behind her, Noah shifted. Caroline didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed locked on Grant. "And you think I'd go along with that?" He smiled faintly. "Caroline, it's not personal. It's just logical." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I don't live my life on spreadsheets." Grant tilted his head. "Be reasonable. You don't have to actually feel anything. I've done enough of that for a lifetime." For the first time, something flickered in his expression, like he realized he was no longer speaking to the girl from the dinner table years ago. She took a step back. "You need to leave." "Caroline, no. You don't get to walk in here, offer me a business deal, and pretend that's love in any form. Not even the kind that hides behind paperwork." Grant glanced at Noah, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I see," he said, tone shifting. Caroline stepped in front of him. "Leave. Now." Grant hesitated, then turned and walked out, slow and smug and irrelevant. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Caroline didn't move. Noah finally stepped forward. "You okay?" She looked up at him, and for the first time all day, her voice didn't shake. "I'm sure." He exhaled, relief visible. "Still scared," she added, voice softer now. "Good," he said. "It means you care." She smiled faintly. "I think I'm finally learning what that actually means." Outside, the paper sun in the hallway spun slightly in the breeze, and somewhere deep in the house, the old floorboards settled, like they'd been waiting for someone to speak up. The house was quieter than usual that evening, not heavy, just holding its breath. Caroline moved slowly through each room, switching off lights, fingers brushing across door frames like she was grounding herself in every inch of the space. The encounter with Grant had shaken something loose, not because he posed a threat, but because of what he represented. A version of her life she'd nearly accepted. A version without heart. She stopped by the front window and looked out across the lawn. The hydrangeas Ruby and Ellie had planted were starting to bloom, early, vibrant, like they had something to prove. Behind her, the kitchen light was still on. She walked back and found Noah washing the last of the dinner dishes, sleeves rolled, movements quiet and steady. "You didn't have to stay," she said. He looked up. "I know." She leaned against the counter. "He wanted me to fake a life. Sign my name on a contract and smile for the board like it meant something. And you told him no." "I told him to leave." She paused. "There was a time I wouldn't have." Noah dried his hands and turned toward her. "What changed?" "You." He didn't smile. He just watched her, eyes searching. "You give me too much credit." "No," she said. "I finally let someone see me. And I didn't disappear." The words hung there, vulnerable and full. Then, "Noah, what is this?" He stepped closer. "This?" She nodded, almost afraid to say it out loud. "It's whatever you're ready for it to be." Her voice was barely audible. "And if I'm not ready to lose you?" His reply came without hesitation. "Then you won't." Silence settled between them again, deep and warm. Caroline reached forward, fingers brushing the edge of his shirt sleeve. "You're in this now, aren't you?" "I was in it the night you whispered, 'Stay.'" She smiled then, real and full, and turned to pour 2 glasses of tea. But before she could speak again, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen. A message from Elliot. "Need to talk. Tomorrow. Urgent." Her stomach twisted, just a little. Something's happening. Noah read her face. Do you want me to stay tonight? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed him a glass and sat down at the table. I want to be strong about this, she said. I want to walk into that meeting tomorrow and show Marcus and the board that I'm not afraid. You already are. But what if they still find a way to take it all? Then we find another way, he said. This house isn't the legacy. You are. She nodded slowly. It just doesn't feel like enough. He leaned forward. It's more than enough. And if it helps, I'll be sitting in the back of that room tomorrow. Quiet, probably underdressed, but there. The emotion in her chest swelled so fast it ached. Thank you. Always. The next morning came sooner than expected. The sky wore a grey shawl of clouds, and the streets of downtown Savannah hummed low with the murmur of midweek activity. Caroline stepped out of the car in a soft navy dress. No jewelry, hair pulled back. Clean. Clear. Not a performance. Noah was already waiting near the courthouse steps with a coffee in hand. He handed it to her without a word. She smiled and took a sip. Hazelnut. You remembered? I remember everything that matters. Elliot met them at the entrance, briefcase in hand, brows knit with concern. We've got a complication. Caroline's heart jumped. What kind? Marcus submitted new testimony. Claims your mental and emotional state is compromised by a romantic entanglement that clouds your decision-making. Her face went pale. He's trying to discredit me using Noah. Elliot nodded. It's a stretch, but it could sway some of the older board members. He's playing the poor judgment card. Noah stepped back slightly, hands flexing once at his sides. I should go, he said. If I'm part of the problem, no. Caroline's voice cracked, but her eyes were steady. He doesn't get to define what makes me whole. You're not a weakness, Noah. You're the reason I remembered I had a choice. Elliot cleared his throat. There's more. Of course there was. He's calling a surprise witness, someone from the family trust. Possibly a former house staff member. Caroline blinked. Who? But Elliot didn't answer. They stepped inside together, the courthouse all marble echo and polished brass. Caroline's heels clicked softly as they walked, each step louder than the last. Inside the boardroom, Marcus stood near the window, flanked by two board members in tailored suits and disinterested expressions. He turned when she entered. Well, he said, smiling, you brought company. I brought clarity, Caroline replied, walking past him without pause. The hearing began. Voices droned, arguments made. Legal language passed like a tennis match no one really wanted to win. Then Marcus stood. He gestured toward the rear doors. The board would like to call one final person, someone who knew Caroline's mother well, someone who can speak to the emotional stability of this estate's future. The doors opened, and an older woman walked in. Silver curls, weathered hands, a pinched expression Caroline hadn't seen in years. Mrs. Jennings? She whispered. Marcus smiled wider. This is Bernice Jennings. My aunt, and the former head steward of the Whitmore estate. The room fell quiet. Bernice walked to the center slowly and turned. I was there when the house was built, when Margaret planted her first azalea, when Caroline took her first steps. She paused, and then looked Caroline straight in the eyes. I know what love looks like in this house, and I know what silence sounds like. Caroline inhaled sharply. Bernice's voice softened, and for the first time in years, I've heard laughter in those halls again. Marcus's smile faltered. She deserves to stay, Bernice said. And she deserves to do it on her terms. The board whispered among themselves. Caroline sat still, tears just beneath the surface. Noah, behind her, caught her eye. He didn't mouth anything. He just looked at her like he had from the beginning, like she was already enough. The hearing wasn't over. But something had shifted. The house wasn't just whispering anymore. It was speaking. The boardroom emptied slowly, as if the weight of what had just unfolded made every step heavier. Caroline sat still, hands folded in her lap, gaze locked on the last line of Bernice's testimony, still ringing in her head like a bell. She deserves to stay. She wasn't sure whether it was validation or permission. Maybe both. Noah was still there, silent in the corner, the only constant in a room where everything else felt up for vote. Elliot leaned over. They've recessed to deliberate. We should know by morning. Caroline nodded, eyes distant. That soon? He offered a small smile. When people know they're wrong, they don't need long. Marcus had already left, coat over one arm, tension masquerading as composure. He hadn't said a word when Bernice spoke, just tightened his jaw and stared at the table like it betrayed him. Caroline rose from her chair slowly, her legs shaky but holding. "Thank you," she said softly to Elliot. "You fought well," he replied. "Now you just wait." She turned to Noah. "I don't think I realized how much this house held me until today. Not because of the walls, but because of what it asked me to be." "And what did it ask?" "Perfect," she said. "Polished." "Quiet. I don't think my mother ever meant for that. But it was built into the structure, into the expectations. The dinners, the traditions, everything had a script." He stepped closer. "And today?" She looked up at him. "I tore the script in half." Outside, the late afternoon light had softened, casting long shadows on the courthouse steps. They walked together in silence until they reached the sidewalk. There were no reporters, no cameras, just wind in the magnolia trees and the subtle hush of a world shifting beneath their feet. At the curb, Noah paused. "Want to go somewhere?" She blinked. "Where?" "I don't know." "Somewhere that has no history. Just now." She smiled faintly. "That sounds terrifying." He grinned. "Good." They ended up at a diner off River Street, linoleum floors, cracked red booths, jukebox humming low in the corner. A place untouched by legacies or boardrooms. The waitress poured coffee without asking. The menu hadn't changed in 30 years. Caroline stared out the window, watching the river push past like time itself. Noah spoke first. "You were incredible today." "I didn't feel incredible. I felt exposed." "That's what courage looks like." She turned toward him, brow furrowed. "You talk like you've done this before." "I've lived through silence," he said simply. "Different kind, same weight." She studied him. "You never talk much about your past." He didn't flinch. "It's not the part that defines me. But it shaped you. Sure, but it doesn't speak for me anymore." She nodded slowly, understanding blooming where there had once been only curiosity. "I think I've been waiting my whole life for someone to ask if I wanted to stay in the life I was given," she said. "And now, I want to stay in the one I'm choosing." His smile was quiet, proud. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to." The waitress returned, plates in hand. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, and a side of fries. Neither of them had ordered, but both knew they'd eat. Caroline laughed. It's like she read my childhood diary. Noah raised a brow. You had a diary? Oh, yes. Filled with dreams of running away, falling in love, saving the house. Except in those dreams, I was always someone else. Someone braver. You don't need to be someone else, he said. You've already become who you were meant to be. She looked at him, her chest tightening again, but this time with hope. Real, present, grounded hope. They sat in that booth until the sun dipped behind the buildings and the lights along the river flickered on, one by one. There were no decisions made, no promises exchanged, just presence. When they finally stood to leave, Noah pulled a scrap of napkin from under his plate. On it, Ellie had scrawled something earlier that day, just before school. It read, "Tell Miss Caroline her house is brave." Caroline stared at the handwriting, smile breaking through the emotion climbing in her throat. "She is," she said softly, but she wasn't talking about the house anymore. The morning after the hearing, Caroline woke before the sun. The house was wrapped in a soft blue quiet, the kind that only came just before dawn, when the world was still deciding whether to start again. She moved through the hallway barefoot, passing Ellie's drawing taped to the wall, the edges curling slightly from humidity. "Tell Miss Caroline, her house is brave." The words stayed with her like breath. She stepped into the kitchen and started the kettle, her movements slow, deliberate. Something in her chest felt different today, not lighter, but more rooted, as if the storm inside had finally decided to settle. Outside, the garden was still damp from overnight rain. Noah had promised to come by later with new wood for the porch rail. Caroline smiled at the thought. He didn't bring flowers. He brought tools, time, and presence, and she was starting to realize those things lasted longer. The kettle clicked off. She poured the water, sat at the table, and let the silence wrap around her like a familiar coat. Then her phone buzzed. "Elliot. Decision's in. Call me." Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Caroline, I'm here." There was a pause, too long. "The board voted," he said slowly. 7-2 in your favor." She blinked, stunned. "Wait, what?" "You keep the house. The trust is revised. You're free of the marriage clause." She gripped the edge of the table. That's real?" "It's real," he said, and his voice softened. "You did it, Caroline. On your own terms." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. Not loud ones, just the quiet kind. The kind that came when something heavy finally lifted and left behind space. "Thank you," she whispered. "You earned every inch of it." When she hung up, she sat still for a moment, heart thudding in disbelief. Then she stood, walked out to the porch, and stared at the land in front of her, the garden, the driveway. The porch she now owned fully, not because someone gave it to her, but because she fought for it. And then she saw him. Noah walking up the path with 2 cups of coffee and that calm smile that always showed up when she needed grounding. She met him at the steps. "You're early," she said, voice catching. "Had a feeling. I got the call." He studied her face. "And?" "We won." His smile deepened, but he didn't cheer. He just set the coffees down, stepped forward, and wrapped her in his arms. She didn't hold back, her cheek pressed against his chest. She felt the solidness of him. The quiet truth of who he was, someone who stayed, not because he had to, but because he chose to. They stood like that, the morning air curling around them, until she pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "I'm not sure what happens now," she admitted. "That's the best part," he said. "Now, you get to decide." She exhaled, shaky and grateful. "Do you think it's okay to want both?" "The house. And something more." "I think it's brave to ask for both," he said. "And even braver to let yourself receive it." She reached for his hand and held it tightly. Behind them the door creaked open. Ellie peeked out, still in pajamas, hair wild. "Why are y'all standing like a movie?" Caroline laughed through her tears. "Because sometimes real life feels like one." Ellie stepped out onto the porch and plopped down between them. "Did we win?" Caroline crouched beside her. "We did." Ellie blinked. "Does that mean I can still come here every Tuesday?" "You can come every day," Caroline said. Noah met her eyes over Ellie's head, and in that glance, something unspoken clicked into place. Later, after breakfast and a second round of coffee, Ruby arrived with a bouquet of garden roses and a knowing smirk. "Told you," she said, pressing the flowers into Caroline's hands. "This house always had more fight in it than people realized." Caroline looked around, at the porch, the garden, the paper sun still spinning near the doorway, and smiled. "Turns out," she said, "so did I." The days after the board's decision passed like a southern breeze, slow, warm, and filled with something unspoken. The kind of calm that follows a storm, where every sunrise feels like a second chance. Caroline had begun walking barefoot again. Through the halls, through the garden, across the porch, her skin reconnecting with the place she almost lost. Every step felt earned now. Every corner of the house, once heavy with expectation, seemed to exhale with her. That Saturday morning, she stood at the edge of the back porch, cup of tea in hand, watching Noah and Ellie build something by the shed. It looked like a birdhouse, but Ellie had grander ideas. "It's a hotel," she insisted, "for birds who got tired of flying." Noah grinned. "Well, if anyone deserves a soft landing, it's them." Caroline smiled from the steps, heart full and restless all at once. Because even with everything finally hers, a quiet question lingered. Now what? Later that afternoon, as the sun stretched shadows across the porch, Ruby knocked on the screen door and walked in like she always did, without waiting. "Got something for you," she said, waving a folder. Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Please don't tell me it's more paperwork." "Better." Ruby sat across from her, unfolding the file. This is your mother's original vision for the land behind the house. She wanted to turn it into a community garden." Had sketches, plans, even a letter of intent filed with the city. Never pushed it forward, though. Too many board restrictions. Caroline leaned forward, fingertips brushing the yellowed paper. "I never knew this existed." She kept it quiet, said she'd fight for it later. Then life got in the way. Something stirred in Caroline's chest. A memory. Her mother sitting under the pecan tree with a notebook, whispering, "A garden feeds more than mouths. It feeds hearts." Caroline's throat tightened. What would it take to revive it? Ruby's eyes sparkled. "Just you saying yes?" By evening, the porch was buzzing with plans. Ellie drew birds and butterflies for the garden sign. Noah talked irrigation and fence posts. Ruby started phoning old friends who still had seed catalogs from the 90s. Caroline watched them all, this small, beautiful chaos, and felt something shift. The house had always belonged to her family, but now it was beginning to belong to more. After dinner, when the stars started peeking through, Noah lingered behind while Ellie and Ruby cleaned up. Caroline stepped out with him onto the porch, the night air thick with jasmine. I keep waiting to feel finished, she said. But all I feel is open. He nodded slowly. That's not a bad thing, isn't it? I spent months fighting for this place, for my name, my story, and now that I have it, I don't know what to do with it. You build something new with it. She looked up at him. With you? He didn't flinch, just said, if you'll let me. There it was again, that quiet steadiness, no pressure. No performance, just presence. She took a deep breath. There's one thing I haven't told you. He waited. My mother, she didn't just leave me this house. She left behind a version of herself I'm only just beginning to understand. And I think I've been afraid that becoming myself would mean losing her. You haven't lost her, he said gently. You're carrying her forward. Caroline blinked back, the emotion pressing at the edge of her eyes. I want this to be more than surviving, she whispered. I want it to mean something. He stepped closer, voice lower now. Then let's make it mean something. She didn't move away. In the distance, the wind caught one of Ellie's paper sun decorations and spun it gently, like it was listening. Noah reached for her hand. Caroline Whitmore, he said, half grinning, would you do me the honor of continuing to be exactly who you are, every day, with no apology? She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that escapes when tears are close. That might be the most beautiful thing anyone's ever asked me. He squeezed her fingers. That's yes, right? She looked up at the stars, then back at him. Yes. The next morning, Caroline stood on the back porch barefoot, holding a steaming mug of coffee and staring out at the open plot of land behind the house. The grass was high and uneven, dotted with forgotten wildflowers and bits of rusted fencing. It looked like nothing special, until you saw it through the lens of possibility. Noah stepped up beside her, holding a tool belt and a tired smile. Morning. She smiled softly, still staring. Doesn't look like much yet, does it? Looks like potential to me. They stood in silence for a moment. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the low hum of cicadas just waking up. Then a truck rolled up the gravel drive, an old Ford, paint flaking, bed loaded with wooden stakes and gardening tools. Ruby hopped out, wearing overalls and a wide-brimmed hat. All right, lovebirds. No time for staring off like a country music video. We got dirt to move. Ellie came skipping out behind her, holding a handmade map of the Bird Hotel gardens, complete with rainbow markers and stick-figure butterflies. Caroline laughed, feeling warmth stretch across her chest like sunlight. Where do we even start? Ruby pointed. You start with the soil, always the soil. Noah chuckled. I think she means metaphorically. I mean both, Ruby replied, planting a spade into the ground with her full weight. You want something to grow? You dig deep first. And that's what they did. All morning, the yard came alive with motion. Ruby directing from one corner like a field general, Ellie planting imaginary seeds between the real ones, Noah hauling bags of compost like it was an Olympic sport. And Caroline, kneeling in the dirt, her hands stained, her spirit lighter than it had been in years. By noon, sweat beaded along her brow and her dress was smudged with clay, but she didn't care. She hadn't felt this connected to the land or herself in a long, long time. Look, Ellie called suddenly. A butterfly. They all turned as a monarch fluttered above the fresh soil, dipping once toward a newly planted row of zinnias. Caroline shaded her eyes. That's a good sign, right? Best kind, Noah said. Then came the sound of an approaching car, sleek, out of place. A black Lincoln pulled into the driveway. The driver stepped out first, opening the door for the passenger with quiet precision. Marcus Jennings. Caroline's breath hitched, and Ruby muttered something under her breath that thankfully Ellie didn't hear. Marcus approached, crisp in a linen suit, not a single crease out of place. Caroline stood and dusted off her hands. "You're not here to change the board's vote, are you?" "No," he said evenly. "That chapter's closed. I came to deliver something." He held out a sealed envelope. "From your mother." Caroline stared at it, hesitant. "Why do you have this?" "She gave it to me after your father died. Said it wasn't for the lawyers. Said it was for the day you'd finally stop living by other people's rules." He paused. "I kept it safe. I may not have agreed with her, but I respected her." She took the envelope, hands suddenly trembling. The paper was soft, worn slightly at the edges. Her name written in her mother's slanted, unmistakable handwriting. Marcus nodded once. "I'll go now." He turned and walked back to the car. No more arguments, no more threats, just a quiet exit that somehow said more than all his boardroom speeches combined. Caroline watched him go, then looked down at the envelope. Her chest ached in that deep, familiar way, the ache of old memories brushing against fresh ones. She walked slowly to the porch, sat on the steps, and opened it. Inside was a single page. No formal greeting, no apology. Just words in ink that reached across time. My Caroline. If you're reading this, then you've already done something braver than I ever could. You chose your voice over the silence that raised us both. You chose presence over legacy. You chose love. This house will always be yours. But your heart, that belongs wherever you decide to plant it. Grow something beautiful, darling. Love, Mom. Caroline folded the letter slowly, eyes stinging. She looked up at the garden in progress, at Ellie dancing through the rows with a watering can, at Ruby bent over a trowel, swearing at a stubborn root, at Noah standing in the sunlight, watching her with that expression, half awe, half certainty, and something inside her settled. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she whispered. Noah walked over and sat beside her. "Yeah," he said softly. "You are." The day the garden opened, the sky broke into a soft applause of sunlight. No dramatic winds, no grand entrance, just warmth, steady and kind, like everything else in Caroline's life that had started to bloom again. It had been 3 months since the board hearing. 3 months of dirt under her nails, morning coffee with blueprints instead of headlines, afternoons filled with laughter instead of whispers. 3 months of becoming. The back lawn was now unrecognizable. What used to be overgrown weeds and forgotten corners had transformed into a stretch of color and purpose. Zinnias danced beside fresh herbs, climbing beans hugged wooden stakes, and rows of tomatoes promised summer before it had even arrived. There were benches tucked under crepe myrtles, birdhouses painted by Ellie and her new friends, and a small hand-painted sign at the entrance that read, "Second Light Garden, a place to begin again." Caroline stood under the shade of the old pecan tree, the same tree where her mother used to sketch ideas. She wore a simple white dress, hair loose around her shoulders. She hadn't planned to speak today, but the sight of everyone gathering, neighbors, board members, even Marcus standing quietly in the back, shifted something inside her. She turned toward Noah, who stood just beside the entrance, Ellie on his shoulders, waving at passing butterflies like they were old friends. Caroline stepped forward, clearing her throat gently. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice calm but full. This garden started as a whisper, a half-remembered dream from my mother's notebooks, from a version of her life she never got to finish. But over the past few months, it became something louder. Something rooted. Something that grew not just from soil, but from choice. She paused, letting the wind fill the silence. I used to think legacy meant preserving everything exactly as it was, holding on so tightly that nothing could change. But now I see, real legacy is what we plant, not what we protect. Noah's eyes never left her. She smiled. So today isn't just a dedication, it's a promise that this house, this land, this space will always be a beginning, not an ending. Applause swelled like a soft wave. Caroline stepped back, heart pounding but steady. Ellie ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist. "We did it. We sure did," Caroline whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Later, when most of the guests had gone and the sun had begun to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the garden paths, Caroline found Noah by the porch steps, quietly coiling a garden hose. She walked over, barefoot again, as she often was now. "You never liked crowds," he chuckled. "I like them fine. I just like quiet better." She leaned against the rail. "You've been quiet today. Just soaking it in." He turned to her, and for a long moment, they didn't say anything. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of basil and earth. "You know," he said finally, "when I first met you, you looked like someone trying not to break." Caroline looked down, then met his gaze again. "And now?" "Now you look like someone who chose to begin." She stepped closer, her hand finding his. "I still don't have all the answers." "You're not supposed to," he said, gently pulling her in. "You just need someone who stays while you figure it out." She rested her forehead against his. "Then stay." He didn't say anything right away, just breathed her in, then whispered, "I was never leaving." That night, after Ellie had fallen asleep curled on the couch, after Ruby had gone home humming to herself, and after the last paper lantern had been strung between the porch beams, Caroline and Noah sat alone in the garden. No words. No future plans. Just stars and silence. Then Caroline spoke, soft enough it almost disappeared into the wind. "Do you think people can really start over?" Noah looked at her, eyes filled with something steady and sure. "I don't think it's about starting over," he said. "I think it's about starting true." She closed her eyes, holding the words in her chest. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was carrying something alone. She felt held, rooted, chosen. The house behind them creaked gently in the breeze, not with age, but with life. And in the quiet, just before midnight, Caroline smiled and whispered the same word that had changed everything. Stay. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.